Welcome everybody to our webinar, Solar Installations on the Farm with Lee from KCP Energy. For those of you that have never attended one of our events before, Rural Roots to Climate Solutions is an Alberta-based nonprofit organization out of the Stettler Learning Center. So we host workshops, field days, and webinars to empower rural Albertans with climate solutions. So we work primarily with farmers and ranchers, but also all rural Albertans to create a space for discussions to happen about climate solutions. And we're also strong advocates of the idea that climate solutions can also be farm solutions. So Lee, you're going to do a much better job of introducing yourself than I can. So I'm going to hand things over to you. I think your screen is already shared. I'm sure everybody can see it. So yeah, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Marie. And thank you everyone for joining in today to learn a little bit more about solar energy on the farm. I am the sales manager for a company out of Calgary called KCP Energy. We're a full service solar design and installation company that has been installing solar in Canada and for Western Canada since 2007. Yeah, we kind of serve the BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan markets. Yeah, we'll kind of get right into it here. Before we gonna get too deep into things, I just want to start with a little bit of basic information so that everyone's on the same page for how solar energy systems work and produce electricity so that you can reduce your energy bills on your farm. If you look at a typical, grid-tied solar energy system, you're gonna have panels mounted on a building or on a ground mount rack somewhere. And these panels are going to produce direct current or DC electricity whenever they get exposed to sunlight. This DC power flows to an inverter, which converts that DC to AC, alternating current, to make it usable within your home or farm. That inverter that does that conversion, it's going to track how much energy is produced. And then it's also going to be tied into the building's electric panel. So that could be a sub panel or any electric panel or distribution panel within the farm system. Or often the case in a lot of farms, you'll have a pole with a transformer in the middle of the yard somewhere with the power meter on it, kind of at the bottom that you see in the bottom right of the slide. That's going to be pretty typical for most farms. They're going to be, multiple feeds potentially coming off of that, going to different outbuildings on the property. So the solar power that gets generated supplies all of the site energy needs that are behind that electricity meter. And if there's more electricity that gets generated than is actually required by the site, that energy gets exported to the grid for credit on the power bill. And if it isn't providing enough electricity to meet the site's energy requirements, it automatically pulls energy from the power grid to power the loads. Whatever that shortfall is, it'll automatically take that. This is all facilitated by a bi-directional smart meter, which is provided by the utility when the system is installed. One common misconception about solar that I often find is that batteries are required to make the system function altogether. Batteries are definitely an option that can be added to any solar energy system, kind of like a backup generator, so that if you have a grid outage, you can continue to provide power to the entire site, or just certain loads on that site, depending how big the battery is. Yeah, now that we have a little bit of background on how the energy actually gets produced and supplied to a site, we can kind of look at how the utility allows for these solar energy systems to be installed altogether. So in Alberta, we have a system called net billing, and that's actually facilitated through the Alberta microgeneration legislation. So all solar energy systems in Alberta that are used to offset a site's energy are considered a microgenerator. And under the microgeneration program, you're able to connect a solar energy system that produces energy independently of the power grid. As we saw before, when electricity is generated by the solar energy system, it powers the site energy loads first. Any excess is sent to the grid for a credit on the bill. Any shortfall pulled from the grid, like at nighttime, for example. Now, within the Alberta microgeneration program, there's kind of two different types of systems altogether. You have large microgenerators, which would be, systems that are 150 to 5,000 kilowatts. And for reference there, I mean, your typical residential home, uses about 8,000 kilowatt hours of power per year, which means they would need about a 7 kilowatt system to power that house, 100% throughout the year. So large systems are quite large, so from 150 to 5,000 kilowatts, and then small systems are anything below 150 kilowatts. The main difference between the two is how any excess or exported energy to the grid is treated. Small microgenerators, when they provide excess power, they supply excess power to the grid. They get credit from their energy retailer that's going to be essentially the same amount that you pay per kilowatt hour, whatever your retail energy rate is. So say if it's 6 or 7 cents per kilowatt hour is pretty typical. If that's your retail energy rate, whatever you pay for power for your retail rate, when you export, you get that same amount back. And however, for large microgenerators, it's a little bit different. So large microgenerators, whenever they have excess generation that gets supplied to the grid, the amount that they get credited is going to be whatever the Alberta power pool pricing is at that time of export. So every hour of the day in Alberta, there's a different pool price, and a large microgenerator would just simply receive whatever that pool price was at that time. So on average, though, it's going to be a little bit less than what you'd receive if you were a small microgenerator when you export. So now that we understand a little bit about how microgeneration works and the different types, we can look at how you would actually go about sizing a solar energy system for microgeneration. So when you look at applying for these microgeneration systems, the utility is going to request that you provide them with an estimated amount for the annual production of that system that it's expected to produce per year. And it's kind of important that you don't, your system isn't expected to produce substantially more than you actually use per year, because the utilities do reserve the right to limit export credits to whatever your site's annual consumption is. Although this isn't really often done in practice, they do reserve that right. So typically you want to try and size it for, at most around 100% of your actual annual usage. And to know how much energy you actually use, often it'll be right on your power bill. It'll kind of show you a graph of how much energy you used in the past 12 months. But if not, it's quite easy as well. You can just request that information from the utility company, and they'll provide you with site-specific historical consumption data for that site. So especially, if you just bought a new farm and you don't have any data, you can still pull the, data from previous owners. Now, the amount of energy that a system can produce is also, of course, going to vary by geographic location. And that's what that map on the slide here is showing, is essentially the more intense red and orange bits of that map are going to be where you're going to receive more production. And of course, towards the north of the province, you're going to receive less. Now, I believe Medicine Hat is the highest producing municipality in Alberta, but the best in Canada is actually in Regina. So, Medicine Hat is going to be close to one of the best places in all of Canada. And Southern Alberta in particular is going to be one of the best places in Canada altogether. And then just globally is actually pretty high on the global scale as well. So pretty phenomenal solar resource in Alberta that we're lucky to have. And there is also, of course, other factors that influence the amount of production that you're going to get, such as shading from nearby objects like trees or buildings, the orientation and the angle that the panels are mounted at. In Alberta, you want the panels to face, directly due south ideally. And then you want to have those panels in a perfect scenario, kind of between, 15 to 45 degrees, which, those are the perfect site conditions. However, if you look at, mounting panels at 20 degrees facing south versus facing west at 20 degrees, your production difference isn't going to be huge. It's going to be maybe 10, 11% less, but not a massive factor. So typically we say, anything facing west, south, or east, or anywhere in between is perfectly fine. You just want to kind of, get away from situations where the panels might be facing, northeast or northwest or fully north, just because the production can be quite poor at that orientation. in terms of, how you actually calculate how much energy a system is expected to produce, so an energy production forecast, your installation company should be able to provide that for you. And there's a variety of different tools that are used to create that production forecast. I mean, I'm pretty fortunate at KCP, only because, the company's been around for 13 years, and therefore they have 13 years of production data that I'm able to use and to provide, pretty accurate production forecasts. But I mean, any company that's worth their salt will be able to provide you that kind of energy generation forecast for 25 or 30 years, no problem. One way of getting all of the information you need to see if a solar energy system is going to make sense for your farm is of course the system proposal. You can get these from an installation company, and the typical process would be to find an installer. They're going to provide you a preliminary assessment that's going to show the estimated production, the system cost, and the general economics associated to the system as well. And if the preliminary numbers make sense for the farm owner, the installer will come out and do a site visit to make sure that the system's going to fit with the existing electrical equipment. And then make sure there isn't any other kind of concerns like shading or other site-specific issues that could affect the performance or installation or code validity or code requirements. Sometimes a site visit may not provide all of the information required, in which case you can always apply to the utility for more site-specific information, such as the transformer size that feeds that property, or the voltage that also feeds that property, and just to make sure that there's no changes to the electrical service that are required to actually install that system. So now that we know how big or how you can size a system and how much energy it's going to generate, we can look at actually how you would go about applying for the microgeneration system. So there's a few, under the application process, there's a few rules, but overall the application process is quite straightforward in Alberta compared to other jurisdictions in Canada. This is typically going to be completed by the installation company, as it requires some electrical engineering documentation to be provided. As well, there's going to be a site plan that they need to put together so the utility kind of knows electrically what's happening, but also physically where the equipment is going. Microgeneration systems are required to meet a few key requirements as well. They have to be connected to the grid distribution system. So a microgeneration system couldn't be essentially an off-grid system. It'd have to be physically connected to the power grid. They must be connected to the grid distribution system, comply with all applicable construction codes and permitting requirements. They cannot be any more than 5,000 kilowatts in size. And as we saw before, the annual solar generation shouldn't exceed the annual site consumption for energy. The application, once you have it together and submit it, typically takes about 1 to 2 weeks to receive notice from the utility whether it's been approved or not. Assuming it was designed correctly, it will be approved. And once approved, you can obtain municipal permits and proceed with the actual installation. After the installation is complete, you need to have an electrical inspection. And once that is approved, the utility comes out and they install a bi-directional energy meter at no charge to the customer. And then once that bidirectional meter is installed, you can have the installation company back out to commission the system. And once it's commissioned, it will start producing power. So those are kind of the basics on the application. So now that we know, how big the system can be and how we'd actually go about applying for it, what are some of the specifics and equipment options that are available, because there are quite a few. So I mean, there's kind of three main components to a solar energy system. You've got your panels, and then your panels are going to be mounted on the system, a racking system. So a variety of different racking systems, and then of course you have your inverter system, which is going to convert that DC electricity to AC. The solar panels are definitely the biggest ticket item when it comes to the quote. They represent usually anywhere from 30 to 40% of the total system cost. So it's really important to know what you're getting. There are a lot of different types of manufacturers, panels, solar cell materials, and a lot of other different characteristics to panels. But what I'm going to focus on here is kind of the two main different types of panels, which are monofacial and bifacial panels. A bifacial solar panel just essentially means that they have glass on the front and the back side of the panel, which actually allows the panel to produce energy from both the backside and then also from light reflecting off of the ground onto the backside of the panel. So a bifacial panel is going to produce, anywhere from maybe 4 to 7% more energy than a monofacial panel. And of course, for that reason, they also cost a little bit more. But often we find in a ground-mounted scenario, which is pretty typical for a lot of farms, that a bifacial panel is always going to produce better overall economics than a monofacial, just because, especially when you get a lot of the snow building up on the ground, you get a huge amount of light reflecting off of that snow, which is just, it's lost energy if you don't capture it. So they produce, about 5 to 7% more on a typical ground mounted system. So usually a good idea to consider those. And then another important factor is going to be the actual wattage of the panel. New panels that are produced today, they kind of range from around 300 to 600 watts now. It's funny, I actually had 500 written in my notes here, but since I did this presentation a few months ago, it's now 600. So, that kind of shows you the pace of development and efficiency that some of these manufacturers are coming out with. I would say the typical panels that we're using on a lot of our ground mounted installations on farms are, in the 400 to 445 watt range, just because we find that's kind of the best price point for production level. Because as you increase in panel wattage, you also increase in cell efficiency. And as that cell becomes more efficient, it's going to be more leading edge technology, and they're going to be a lot more expensive. Usually around that 400 to 450 watt range is what we find seems to be the sweet spot these days. When it comes to, the next big, one of the other big pieces of equipment that kind of comprises the system would be the racking system. There's going to be, your two main categories are going to be roof mounted and ground mounted systems. Roof mounted is often preferable if you can do it, only because they cost quite a bit less, and therefore they provide more economic benefit overall. But as a system gets bigger and bigger and bigger, there is definitely a tipping point where it's going to make more sense to do a ground mounted system, only because you're going to max out how big a roof can actually be and how much you can support in terms of both weight and panels. Typically we'll see for, maybe installations over on a farm, usually if it's over 50 kilowatts, it usually ends up going to a ground mounted system. But if anything below that, if you have, a good roof that can hold panels, that would be the best option to look at first. The other main component is the inverter system. There's kind of, inverter systems are going to be a variety of different sizes and voltages depending on what the site actually, uses for power. Most farms are going to be single phase power, so 240, 120 volt split phase, single phase power. If you get into large commercial farming operations, you might have 3-phase power, there's going to be inverter solutions that can output the required voltage for any specific type of site or voltage. And the other two main categories of inverters as well, aside from, your voltage inside, are going to be string versus microinverters. And that's what you can actually see on the top right of the slide. So the top one there, that would be, a string inverter, and the bottom would be a microinverter. So that string inverter, essentially what that means is you're going to have a bunch of panels all connected together in a series or a string. And each of those strings of panels kind of goes back and feeds directly into the inverter. With a microinverter system, it's more of a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 ratio. So you'd have either 1 or 2 panels per microinverter. These are advantageous, I'd say, more so in residential applications where you might have some shading. Maybe you have some trees nearby that cast some shade onto the roof. The microinverters are going to help adjust the production per panel with shading concerns. But I would say by and large on almost every farming installation that the string inverter is going to be the go-to because they cost less and they perform just as well as a microinverter in that type of situation. So yeah, now that we have a little bit of knowledge on some of the components, why don't we look at some of the benefits that these systems actually offer to potential owners? So why would a farm consider going solar? Well, I mean the technology, although it might be new to Canada, it's pretty established globally. There's a system gets installed every 5 minutes in the U.S. Just to give you some scope or scale of how prolific these are. And the industry in Canada, compared to the U.S., if you account for population difference, the industry in Canada is about 10 times smaller here. So we still have a lot of catching up to do, and especially in Western Canada, most of the installations in Canada are in Ontario. But again, very proven technology. Of course, one of the main reasons that people go with solar is to save money on energy costs. Pretty straightforward there. Power prices are increasing, and one way to essentially hedge yourself or create a situation where you're somewhat indifferent to the increasing power prices is to buy a solar energy system. The reason there is when you buy a system, you're essentially pre-purchasing energy for 25 years at a fixed rate. And that fixed rate is already substantially lower than what the utility prices can offer. And if you look at, these are the different wire service providers in Alberta in this graph here. And as you can see from, this is 2004 to 2018, the transmission charges are going up substantially. This is just for transmission costs, but I believe the statistics are transmission rates, if you look at the past 10 years, are increasing at about 20% per year. Distribution costs are increasing at 9.5% a year, and energy costs are increasing at about 1.5% per year. So pretty substantial increases across all of the things that go towards what makes up your total energy bill. So that's a lot of the reason that people go with this is, they're kind of worried about increasing prices, so they want to lock in a low rate. Another reason is because, especially right now, there's pretty low financing rates that are available specifically for agricultural producers. Some of you might be aware, but there's actually, I believe it's Canadian agricultural producer. The CAP program offers financing at very low rates. And then we also work with ATB Financial, who has a solar financing program that have, I believe their rate for agricultural producers is prime plus 1%, which would be 3.45% right now. The reason that those low interest rates are really appealing specifically for solar energy systems is when you look at, taking out a loan for maybe 10 or 15 years to pay off the system, when you look at what that monthly cost is to actually pay off that system over time, often the case is the amount of energy you're actually saving per month is more than you actually have to pay to finance that system. So, with $0 out of pocket, you could effectively be saving money, in your first month going forward. So that's, obviously still better on the return side to pay in cash, but I mean, not everybody has 30 to 50 grand in cash sitting around. So financing options can be a really good way to help reduce overall energy costs for a farm. There's also some special tax treatment for solar energy systems. The Canada Revenue Agency, they'll actually allow you to depreciate 100% of the system's cost in its first year of operation. So what does that mean for your typical farmer? Say if the system costs $30,000, essentially for your revenue in that year, you're able to reduce your taxable revenue by the entire cost of the system. So essentially that system is about 23% cheaper if you can depreciate 100% of its cost in its first year, 23% being your corporate tax rate in Alberta. So that's why, for producers that, especially this year, I know a lot of grain farmers had really good years this year, just because there was, phenomenal overall weather. Anyone who's going to realize a big profit this year, they're actually going to have to pay, of course, tax on that profit. So this could be a good way to potentially avoid some taxes, with buying a system that you can then depreciate and reduce your taxable revenue. And then I guess last but not least is just lower overall operation costs for yourselves and also for a next generation. So if the farm is passing hands onto that next generation, that can be a nice little present to them is having some low guaranteed electricity costs that reduce the overall operating cost of that farm going forward. Kind of following along with some of these benefits, this is kind of somewhat explains that the tax benefit that I was talking about. So again, 100% of the system's cost can be depreciated in the first year. This is, you're able to do this up until 2023. And then after that, you are not able to claim that 100% in its first year, but you'd have to kind of split that up over multiple years. So those are some of the basic benefits of solar. So we'll kind of look at maybe some of the financial impacts that these kind of systems can have on a typical farm. So when you're kind of looking at the economic viability of a solar energy system, there are some primary factors that drive system financials. First and foremost is the amount of energy the system actually produces. So in the event the building or area that's being considered has factors that significantly reduce the production potential, such as shading from trees or buildings, that might not be the best spot to place those solar panels. I mean, on farms, it's pretty rare that there's not some available space we can find for some panels. I mean, the other thing when you're kind of trying to site where you want to put that, you also want to try and put it as close to where you're able to connect in to the electrical system as well, because the further away you are, you know, the more wire you're going to require, the more it'll cost. Yeah, the next would be, aside from space, would be, you know, making sure that your energy generation forecast is, of course, accurate, because that's what your entire system financials are going to be based on. So, you know, ask your installation company at what degree of certainty, you know, they are providing these financials. And I mean, some companies might even provide a production guarantee within a certain parameter. So, you know, those are the kind of questions you want to ask to make sure that, you know, they're actually giving you what they believe to be a very accurate forecast. Because if it's significantly more, of course, the financials are going to be way off. And what else? Yeah, electricity cost. That's the other kind of main factor that drive the system financials. Now, electricity costs are going to vary throughout different areas of the province. In Alberta, you know, your typical rate for your energy costs is going to be about maybe 6 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And then there's also other utility rate offers and structures that are very specific to people that have a solar energy system. And essentially it allows them to have kind of two different rates. They have a summer rate and a winter rate. You know, and they have the winter rate would be a low rate, so that in the wintertime when you're not producing very much solar power and you're using a lot of energy to heat your home, you know, you're gonna have that low rate. And then in the summertime when you're producing, you know, substantially more energy often than the farm actually requires, you have a high rate, so that when you sell all that energy back to the grid, you know, you're actually selling that for a high rate. So it reduces the payback on the system, and you know, increases the overall, you know, financial performance. Now, when it comes to your, you know, what the total cost you pay on your bill is, it's kind of split up into your distribution, transmission, rate riders, and energy costs. So that 6 to 8 cents is just the cost of energy that your retailer charges you. There's also some, I guess, fixed and variable costs as well within your transmission and distribution fees. Distribution and transmission, I would say, make up about 2/3 of your bill, and of that, 66%, 33 of it is what you consider variable. Variable energy charges are essentially what types of charges that, you know, the more energy you use, the more you'll actually have to pay. These are kind of different than demand charges, and some of you might have seen that on your bill depending on what type of service you have. And then depending on the type of service you have as well, you know, there's a typical farm service, but you might have a grain drying service or an irrigation service, or some large commercial farming operations will actually have like a large general service. All those different types of services also carry with them different variable and fixed fees, and how that's split up. So again, it's really important that when you're looking and evaluating a solar energy system and for its financial impact, that you're understanding what the total variable energy rate is that's being used in the calculations. And if you ask that from your installation provider, they should be able to supply it, no problem. Total installation cost is another major factor that influences the system's economics as well. System cost is going to be largely based on the total system size. The bigger the system gets, the cost per panel will reduce as that system increases in size. So a lot of economies of scale when it comes to solar. And of course, how you mount that as well is another big consideration. So, the best performing systems are going to be large roof mounted systems, just because the cost per panel is going to be quite low for the installation. Because farm systems do range so much in size, and also how much and how much power they use, I wanted to show kind of a bit of a range on how much they actually cost. So if you look at the installation cost of $1.75 to $2.50 per watt, that's just going to be multiplied by the number of panels multiplied by the number of watts that panel has. So your total system watts by your total cost per watt. That's a pretty typical metric that you'll see for solar energy. It just allows people to evaluate one system to another that might be at different sizes. A good way to estimate how much a system might cost in terms of how many kilowatt hours per you use per year, and that'll give you kind of a rough idea of the potential system cost. So, for example, if your farm uses 20,000 kilowatt hours per year, and you want to try and offset maybe 100% of that, it might cost somewhere around about $40,000 for that system, just as a very rough estimate. Depending on how you purchase the system can also, impact the financials of that system. For example, if you're financing the system, that's going to carry interest charges, and those interest charges, of course, are going to, increase the system's overall payback period. But if you end up paying more for the system in total, although you would end up paying more for the system in total if you finance it, sometimes it can produce a better return only because you're not having to pay that big initial upfront cost. And as you pay that system off over time, the price of electricity is also increasing during those time periods. So that can offset some of those interest charges. But from a simple payback calculation, the paying cash up front is always going to be the best. But on return on investment, sometimes financing the system will actually produce a higher return on investment if you can get a low financing rate. And of course, if you're going to be able to save more money per month than you would actually be paying in financing payments per month. However, in Alberta, there's another way that you can produce some additional revenue from the system, and that's with carbon credits. Some farms already take advantage of these types of carbon credits through carbon credit aggregators. So, no-till tilling, I believe, is one area where that is realized in a lot of farms in the province. Essentially what happens is large industrial facilities will buy carbon credits from aggregators to offset their industrial operations. And as a rule of thumb, I mean, the carbon credits for solar are usually somewhere around the 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour is what you could expect to receive. So not terrible, considering, your energy rate is usually around 6 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. So with those financial performance factors in mind, let's have a quick look at some of the advantages of the actual. Sorry, let's look at the actual system performance on some of these typical system setups. So for a typical family farm, this is an example from Red Deer. This was a 15.6 kilowatt system, so there was 39 panels on there. It was roof mounted. It was a 412 roof pitch, which is about an 18-degree tilt angle, and it was facing southeast. So in its first year of production, it produced about 14,900 kilowatt hours. And the turnkey cost on this system was $30,000. I mean, yeah, there's some site details here. So, they've got a house shop, a couple of buildings, 15 kVA transformer, 200 amp service. Their variable cost of energy was 12 cents per kilowatt hour. And this system, it actually offsets 78% of the farm's annual electricity usage. And from the economic side, it's gonna take 10 years to pay the system back, which is about a 10.7% return on investment. And that farmer is eligible for about $220 per year in carbon credits. So not a terrible investment, considering some of the investments you could make in other long-term RRSPs or mutual funds. We'll look at a large microgenerator example. So that first one would have been a small microgenerator. This would be a large microgenerator. So this is a 160 kilowatt system. So it's about 400 panels. You can kind of see those panels kind of at the very bottom of the screen there. They're ground mounted, facing south at 35 degrees. And this system produces 215,000 kilowatt hours per year and had a turnkey installation cost of $275,000. It offsets about 64% of this site's annual electricity usage, and their variable energy cost was 11 cents per kilowatt hour. A little bit better economics in this situation, only because as the system, of course, gets bigger, the cost per panel is reduced. So this is a 9.4-year payback, which is an 11.6% return on investment, and it's eligible for $3,200 in carbon credits per year. So again, not terrible either. Yeah, I guess now that we've kind of looked at some of the system financials, what are some of the, I guess, site and infrastructure considerations if you were to maybe take a walk around the yard and see if there was, an ideal spot for a system on your property? On the electrical side, I mean, the first thing you want to look at, if you can see it, would be your transformer size. Often you'll have a transformer kind of on a power pole in the middle of your yard somewhere, and it'll have a rating at the very top. Usually say 7.5 or 10, 15, 25 kVA. That's just the actual rating of the transformer. The other one too is how the power is distributed within the site. So once it comes down from that transformer to the meter, often it'll go into a splitter box, which will then go to a house or a barn or another building on the site. So it's important to know what those ratings are on those. So how many amperage, what the amperage rating is. So 200 amps or 400 amps or whatever it may be. The other one would be how you're actually going to get the power from the solar panels to wherever you're going to connect it. So if you're connecting at the pole, you're going to have to dig a trench to lay the conduit and wiring in, versus if it's on the roof, you need to make sure that you have somewhere where you can, a sub panel or an electrical panel somewhere you can connect into. So just understanding, where how that power is going to get from the panels to the distribution system. When it comes to the structural side, if you're putting it on the roof, a structural assessment and engineer design may be required. I would say that 9 times out of 10 on a farm it will be. And then when you're looking at a ground mount, essentially you're installing a big sail in the ground. So you want to make sure that you have some geotechnical and structural engineering that's done to make sure that that wind is not going to blow that thing right out of the ground. Again, when it comes to a roof mounted system, depending on the type of material you have on the roof, you might need to make sure that the warranty on that roofing material is maintained. And that's going to be, again, probably up to the installation provider to advise on that, and advise on some of the typical ways you can make sure to maintain your warranty, depending on who the manufacturers or who carries a warranty for that roofing product. If it's a flat roof, which is not often the case in most farming applications, but often in commercial buildings, there might have to be some different, what you call a sacrificial layer, or different substrates put on underneath the racking system that separate the racking system from the roofing membrane, just to make sure that there's no wear and tear. I suppose, one of the last things here is making sure that you have optimal system performance. So, one of the ways to make sure that your energy generation forecasts come true, to make sure that they actually hit that forecasting level, is by consistently monitoring and providing maintenance to that system so that it's always operating in tip-top shape. It's like the easiest way to see what's happening with the system is through the production monitoring, which every inverter has their own platform where they allow you to sign in on your smartphone or on the computer, and you can actually see live how much energy that system has producing today or yesterday, or throughout the entire life of the system. Depending on the setup and how big the system is, you might want to consider a revenue grade meter. For large, large industrial farms, they'll typically go with that road just to make sure that they know exactly how much energy is being produced. And again, that's, these production estimates, they keep your installation company honest as well. When they tell you that you're going to be generating a certain amount of energy, you want to make sure that you have a way to track that. And this is definitely the easiest way. And they should as well input the forecasted energy generation into the monitoring so that every time you log in and you look at it, you can kind of see how close you are to the benchmark that was provided to you. Again, annual maintenance checks are always recommended, kind of similar to how you'd have your furnace looked at, maybe once every year or two. You probably want to have your system looked at at least once a year to make sure that it's in tip-top condition, and that you're doing physical inspections as well, just because you are dealing with live power. It's probably a good idea to make sure there's not any loose connections or anything that could result in the system producing less energy. Typically with these, you're going to receive a report at the end that details any issues or loose connections or any recommended fixes that should happen to make sure the system continues to operate at optimal performance. Yeah, that's most of what I have here today in terms of a very brief crash course on how you go about getting solar installed, how it all happens, and what some of the typical benefits and system financials look like. But I would like to open it up to any questions here. And yeah, I see that there's a couple in the chat here that I'll go through first. So why don't we go through those? And if anybody else has a question, please don't hesitate to let me know. So the one question I have here is, how long do the solar panels last? Maintenance cost, life of system. So the panels have kind of a dual warranty on them. So they have a manufacturer's guarantee that the panels will be free of defects for, anywhere from 10 to 12 years is pretty common. And then they also have a system production warranty, and that's a 25-year warranty. And essentially what it guarantees is that by year 25, the panels will still output 85% as much as they did on their first day of operation. So solar panels, they are made, the cells that produce electricity, they're made of silicon, and silicon degrades very slowly over time, about 0.5% per year. So essentially by year 25, they're guaranteeing that, yeah, you got 85% as much output as you did on the first day. And if you're receiving less, then they provide new panels for you. So that would be kind of that one for that question. I actually don't see any other questions here. If there's anything else that anybody wanted to ask, please let me know. I also do have my email there at the bottom. So if you do have any questions, just general questions or suggestions for your own property, please feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to get you any information that you'd like. Is there a government body that is an ombudsman for the industry? Not really, if that's what you're meaning. There is the main industry group for solar in Alberta is called Solar Alberta. They're more of an education and awareness group, though. They provide a lot of training and information, but they don't provide a lot of oversight on the industry. The next, I guess, industry body would be, well, it's now CanREA, which is now the Canadian Renewable Energy Association. But in terms of, I guess it would be the electrical contracting industry, that really, I guess, would be the main service industry association for solar, because you do have to be a certified journeyman electrician to be able to install a solar energy system, and you have to be a master electrician to be able to pull a permit to install a solar energy system. So those are, I guess, kind of two of the main, government body oversights. And then the microgeneration legislation is what, legislates and enables, the installation and, sale and export of energy to energy retailers. One question there was snow problems, question mark. So when it comes to snow and solar, when you look at, I guess, if you're considering it from, reducing your cost of energy that you have to pay for, when you do your energy generation forecast, at least I can only speak for ourselves, of course, that is included in your forecast. So, when we look at a typical system production throughout a calendar year, it looks very much like a bell curve. So it kind of goes up and then down. So you'd have your shoulder months being, your winter months, and then your summer months right in the middle are going to be when you produce the most amount of energy. So although, yes, the snow does reduce the amount of output those panels will receive, and if you're able to take that snow off, that's great. However, during the winter months, I mean, if you look at the 6 darkest winter months, as much as that's 50% of the year, it only accounts for maybe about 15% of your annual production. So you're not actually even getting that much production during those times of year anyhow. But it is beneficial to remove the snow if you can safely. On our solar water panels, bird droppings effect. What about hailstorms impact? So again, this is very similar to the snow being on the panels. So, I mean, water is fine. I mean, the panels are going to be tilted, so the water is just going to run off. When it's raining, of course, you're not going to be producing, any or very much energy. On say an overcast day, you are still producing some energy, but it's the sunlight intensity that dictates how much energy you actually produce. And again, so when it's raining, probably not going to be producing very much. You're not going to have very much access or exposure to sunlight. Same with snow. If there's snow accumulated on the panels, they are not going to really be producing very much energy. And then, I mean, bird droppings, it's definitely recommended that those are cleaned off. Some of the ways that you can, not have birds, be around or underneath the panels, you can buy what are called critter guards, which is essentially just a screen that goes around if it's a roof mounted system, of course, that goes around the perimeter of the panels to make sure that, squirrels or birds can't get in underneath the panels and nest, which is the most common issue we find whenever there's bird droppings on the panels. Hail is another question. I guess a really good, area we can point to is there was a huge hailstorm in northeast Calgary that happened this past summer. I think it was in June or July. And I mean, there's still houses there that don't have any siding on them. And we have been doing a lot of panel replacements. Not replacements, but we've been removing the panels from the system, which are completely intact, despite the roof all around the panels being a complete write-off and also the siding being a complete write-off. So the panels, we remove them, they're gonna reinstall the siding, reinstall the roofing, and then we're just putting the same panels back on because there's no damage to them. Panels do have to be hail tested at the manufacturing facility as part of their manufacturing process. So they are very resilient to hail and have tempered glass that is installed on top of them, kind of similar to what you'd have on your car windshield. So very strong glass that can withstand a substantial impact. I mean, I won't say they're invincible, but it's a very, very low likelihood that a hailstorm would destroy the panels, especially as well because panels, again, often mounted on an angle, anywhere from say 15 to 40 degrees. So when the hail hits it, it's unlikely you'd be experiencing a direct impact. It'd be most likely a glancing impact. I think that's all I have for questions here as well. Would scaffolding be placed around a building for weeks when you're installing on a roof is what I'm assuming there? No, you would not. Typically, I mean, depending on the type of roofing material, you would be able to walk directly on the roof itself. If there was an issue walking directly on the roof and it wasn't possible, then it's also a pretty strong likelihood that that roof wouldn't be able to support the weight of the panels. And you might want to consider a ground mount in that instance. But typically, no issue. There's no scaffolding that's required to install the systems. Typically, we go directly on the roof to install those, and would be done depending on the size of the system. We would either do that with a ladder. We also have some electric ladders that allow us to get components up there. And on very large installations, we use heavy machinery, whether that be a telehandler or a crane. Yeah, I think that would be all the questions that I see here so far. Again, if there's anything else, please do feel free to send me an email, and I would be happy to help you out. I guess one last thing I will mention is there is looking like there's going to be a rebate program for solar and other energy efficiency products that's going to be starting in January. Farms are eligible because it's a program only for businesses. Farms being a business would qualify. We don't know how much it's going to be or what portion of the system or cost it's going to take on, but looking like that's going to be happening. So if you want more information, again, please feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to provide you with some more details on what I know.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Pleasure.
That's really good to know about this January. We'll have to keep in touch about that so we can share the news if anything comes up. So I noticed everybody's been asking the questions in the chat box, and Lee, you've done a great job of keeping track of all of that. But if anybody wants to ask Lee a question directly, feel free to just unmute yourself. Also, I noticed I don't see anybody showing up on video. So if you want to, feel free to start your video feed up. You don't have to, obviously, but the world is kind of weird right now. We don't get to see enough people as it is, so we don't mind seeing your face if you don't mind. But yeah, I see some more questions come up in the chat box here, Lee. So I'll let you take care of those. And like I said, if you have questions, feel free to turn on your mic, turn on your video feed, and let's ask Lee as much as we can right now while we have him here.
Lee, I got a question.
Yes.
Who applies for like rebates and things that come up? Do you guys do that, or?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. So typically the rebate program, I mean, it really depends on how much documentation they're going to require you to submit. But I mean, for every other rebate program the province has had that involves solar, we've always applied on the behalf of the customer, just because there is often some technical documentation that's required that's just a little bit easier. But I mean, one of the main things that's also required is a signed contract. So, there's not going to be any sneaky business happening without the customer's knowledge.
Yep. Good. Thank you.
I see another question in the chat box. Do your figures include regular maintenance and checks?
Yes. So for that smaller system, like I believe it was the $30,000 system, that includes a one annual site visit valued at $150. So basically it's, one guy coming out there for 2 hours and doing an assessment, doing some checks. And then it wouldn't include, performing any fixes of deficiencies that are found, but that is, that's your annual system checkup cost. And then on the larger system, I believe it was $1,000. Only because there's some different equipment that's usually used on larger systems, and you have to have 2 people there as well. So it's about $1,000 that was included in those economics for operation and maintenance cost.
Yeah, very good.
What else is interesting?
Something I thought that was interesting, Lee. So yeah. We did this presentation with you back in, I believe, August.
Mm-hmm.
And during your presentation earlier, you said the figures had already changed just since August. Like that speaks volumes to the amount of development that's happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of investment that's going into renewable electricity, specifically in solar, just because solar is one of the very few types of energy sources that can be done at a very, very small scale or at a very large scale. So as opposed to say wind or hydro, that where it's not applicable, or even, typical fossil fuel generation is also, more difficult. I mean, a generator would be kind of the exception there, of course, but yeah, it's one of the few that is able to be installed, pretty much anywhere. So that's why there's so much investment and development happening. Panels these days are almost a commodity, and which I'm sure a lot of the farmers here understand very well. It's there is some regulation that gets imposed by the government of Canada on the types of panels that are even allowed to be installed in Canada or imported. So the government does do a little bit of, I guess, some of the heavy lifting to make sure that we do get good quality components here. Yeah, I mean, the industry is evolving at a very rapid pace. I've only been in the industry for 5 years, and I don't even recognize it.
So
go ahead, Ralph.
Just about the quality of the panels. Does it matter where they're made? Like, is a made in Canada or a North American panel better than an imported panel? Like,
not necessarily. I mean, there's going to be, the way that I typically look at manufacturers isn't by necessarily the quality of their panel, because it's kind of, anybody can say anything about the quality of their panel, right, when you read it. What really matters is the bankability of the company to support the warranty. So what that means is when we look at, we do large scale procurement of panels, that are worth millions of dollars. And we want to make sure that if there's ever any issues with those panels 15, 20 years down the road, that company's still going to be around. So, we often buy from companies that are not just focused in manufacturing solar panels. They actually have a variety of different business lines. I mean, yeah, the majority of the components are manufactured, like the components are all manufactured in different places, then assembled at assembly plants for the panels, right? So it's a very, globally distributed manufacturing industry. There are actually some panels that are assembled in Canada and in Ontario, but I mean, there's only really, I think there's one manufacturer in Ontario that does that. And they actually service pretty much 100% of their panels go to the US because they're too expensive for Canada and they're more specialty. So yeah, that's kind of where it happens. Most of them come from Thailand, South Korea, Vietnam. We actually have a tariff on Chinese-made solar panels in Canada. So we don't actually have any Chinese-made solar panels that are allowed to be installed here. So they come from other parts of the world.
Very good. Yep.
So it says, presumably the initial proposal will be done at arm's length. At what stage would there be a physical survey of the site? Is there a cost if the site is far away? Yeah, so yeah, you are 100% correct. Typically the first estimate, and again, I can only really speak to our proposal process. We do a 3D model of the system that allows us to produce the generation forecast to know how much energy it's going to be produced and how much it's going to offset. And then we run the financials based off that. And then if those look good, we would do a physical site visit. I mean, for ourselves, we don't charge for site visits, but some companies may. And if the site was like really, really, really far away, like way in the north of the province, I would probably recommend another installation company that we work with and that we trust to do a good install to get in touch with. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the very basics of it. In terms of what you'd actually need to reach out to a company, all you really need is a power bill and your address. With those two things, you should be able to get a high level assessment and proposal to see what it can do for you from any company that knows what they're doing. And yeah, I would say it is a new industry in Alberta. There's not a lot of, I mean, we've been around for 13 years, but I think we're the second oldest company in the province. There's quite a few solar providers in the province. When you reach out and ask somebody, about their process, about their equipment or installation or warranty or anything like that, just make sure that you dig a little bit below the surface. For example, if they say they have a 5-year warranty, like ask them to send you their warranty documentation that says that actually lays out what that workmanship warranty entails. Because a lot of people, will take that for their, on someone's word that it's a 5-year warranty, and they assume it, it's comprehensive, but in the fine print of your contract or whatever, it might not be so explicit. So always make sure that you ask for the details, especially when it comes to the energy rate or the energy forecast that is used to create the financials of the system. It's really important that you do that, because Alberta probably has one of the most complicated electricity frameworks in the entire of Canada, because it's deregulated. Well, not even 100% deregulated. Some things are, managed by the government, like transmission networks and distribution, versus the actual creation and generation of energy is completely privatized. So, anybody can start their own power plant and sell energy to whoever they want. So it makes for a fairly complicated system with a lot of different rates and structures and user types. So just make sure you kind of dig into the details to make sure you know what you're getting.
Good. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks everyone for signing in here. And yeah, I hope you all are enjoying this lovely cool weather here.
Yeah. And again, Lee, thank you so much. After our last presentation that we had quite a few questions come up after the fact. And you were so great at answering people's questions after the presentation. So if anybody, if you didn't ask your question now while Lee is here, or if something comes up over the next couple of days, feel free. You can either reach out to me, I can put you in touch with Lee, or his email's down at the bottom, and you can reach out to Lee directly. He's really great at figuring out all this stuff. Like you said, it's kind of complicated in Alberta. So it's nice to know that we can ask you questions about this.
Good. Very
All
good.
right. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone. Be well.
Yeah, everybody take care. Have a great rest of your day. And Lee, thank you again so much for your time. We really appreciate having you.
My pleasure. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Take care. If you'd like to learn more about what we can do for your part of rural Alberta, please visit our website at rr2cs.ca.